Right, let's come back to you now, because I've been having this conversation for the past 3 days, and everyone agreed that MK Abiola's electoral victory championed the right to equality and non-discrimination. They say that was an electoral victory that showed that true democracy is about inclusion and respect for all identities. What role do civil society organizations and the media play in strengthening or weakening democratic institutions? Are these institutions adequately protected from political interference and intimidation?
Well, you see, if there is any breach of our democracy today, the first people who will pay the prices are men of conscience and conviction, because they will speak out. And that was the reason why in 1993, when I said earlier, when the election was annulled, the political class were not ready to fight, because many of them were not ready to go to jail or be shot at. That is where the civil rights activists and human rights activists and the human rights community came forward and became the avant-garde of the struggle for democracy. And in the northern part of Nigeria too, you can see how we spread the democracy, because the military then tried by all means to see how they can ethnicize or sectionalize the struggle. But we were able to move forward. I can remember Sani, the governor of Kaduna State today, was in the forefront when many of us were in jail, because they thought that by keeping many of us in jail, the struggle could have died. So where we are today as a country, the democracy we are today enjoying as a country was the product of struggle and sacrifice of some persons, just like you see in South Africa. And so to me, if we are going to sustain the gains of democracy, we must ensure that democracy makes meaning in the lives of our people. Because if people cannot feed, if people cannot pay their rents, if people cannot pay the school fees of their children, if people are insecure, they will start asking questions of what relevance is the whole democratic process.
Absolutely.
If you look at young people today, they have become darlings of military rule for the very fact that they had no experience of what life was under military rule, and they thought that civilian life, civilian government or democratic government is worse than the military. So you can't blame them for that. But the only way to win over them is to see how democracy make positive impacts in their lives. And this generation of leaders who are in position of power have benefited from the benevolence of Nigerian state. Many of them went to public primary school, public secondary school, public universities, and they benefited from scholarships. So that should be extended to new generation. By doing that, it makes them to love their country and appreciate democracy. But if the lives of people keep deteriorating, they will ask questions and they will continue to repudiate or rebuke democratic ideals and philosophies.
All right, Senator.
Continue to appreciate what they don't know.
Right. And if I'm to go back to the president's speech, the president publicly stated that we could not have won the battle against military dictatorship without the irrepressible journalists. And he went on to name key media organizations that were proscribed and silenced during that era. You marched alongside these journalists in opposing military rule. In your experience, how did their reporting and bravery influence the course of the June 12 struggle?
Well, this is the first time I said in the history of our return to democracy in Nigeria since 1999, when a president publicly acknowledges those institutions that stood in the defense of the ideals of freedom and democracy, specifically the media. You can remember how media houses were proscribed. The Tell magazine, the News magazine, Punch, Guardian, Concord, Daily Sketch, all these are, and to the point that many of them had to go underground. And the Tell was publishing Deadline, and the News was publishing Tempo. That was the journey. From the time of military, over 41 media houses were closed down, and their journalists and editors were arrested and sent to prison. The Academic Staff Union of the University was proscribed. National Academic Union was proscribed. You can see the Nigerian Labour Congress was proscribed. Frank Kokori of Nupeng was arrested. You remember Milton Debibi and Warebi Agameni, and you can see the execution of Ken Sar. When Sario was executed, I happened to be in Port Harcourt prison when we were moved from Kirikiri prison to Port Harcourt, a letter taken to Aba prison in Abia State. Now, appreciating the role of the media is more or less as a booster to them to continue to hold the government accountable. And this is the first time a president, a sitting president, has really recognized the role the media play. Without the media, many of us could have simply been executed while in prison because they kept the torch, they kept us on the spotlight, and also kept those who were outside supporting them in the rallies, the civil disobedience campaign, the strikes action that were taking. It was the media that amplified, that strengthened, that reinforced that struggle, and recognizing and appreciating some of them who were in the front line, I think it is most commendable on the side of Mr. President. At least for the first time in history, we're having that.
But then, how can Nigeria better protect whistleblowers, journalists, and activists under democracy?
Well, you see, our generation that fought for democracy, and we have a new generation of young people now, also in the field of activism. They have better facilities. For example, under military rule, if we are to organize protests, we meet at night, we print leaflets, we go to the markets, the parks, the public gathering, and share it and come out. And we can be shot at, and we can also be arrested and sent to prison indefinitely or disappeared, never to be seen. But today, I have seen some of the protests being organized. You see them with laptops, with handsets, and they will even be live streaming it. Some of them will even be taking selfie with policemen. This is what happened. But we must appreciate that what happened at the end SARS was a reenactment of our struggle during the era of military rule. And you can still appreciate people like Shehu, who are still keeping the touch of the struggle and are still keeping that tradition. So wherever you have a government, you need protesters. You need people to strike. By that, you keep them awake, you keep them on their toes. And we cannot be activists yesterday or today and now be opposed to protest and opposed to strikes. But we want it to be done in a way that it's within the ambit of the law of our country and the one in which will not wreck the whole democratic process. So I really say that what the president has said for the firm, he said it from an informed position. And you cannot have the mistake we did as activists actually in 1999 was for the fact that after we came out of prison, many of us came out from prolonged imprisonment, we refused to join the transition program. We never believed that the democracy would last, and then we were still on the Aluta stage, fighting Abdul Salam, attacking and criticizing him, while traditional politicians were organizing themselves into meetings. And the meeting we had before this democracy, on the eve of democracy, was that we were divided into two. Some said we shouldn't join the transition program. But Tinubu, at that time, when we had that meeting, he said if he doesn't join the transition program, then some people will take over power. Then many of us who refused to join, many years later, we started struggling trying to be elected into office, while already the professional politicians have entrenched themselves in seats. That's why you see today, many of those who fought for democracy, who were jailed, who were exiled, who suffered, are not holding position of authority or power because by the time they realized that they need to be in the political seat to effect change, already all the spaces have been occupied. So he happened to be the man who disagreed with us at that meeting, and today he has been proven